I recently gave a talk, and during the Q&A afterwards there were quite a few interesting questions. Some of them gave me enough food for thought to make a video. So here we are today, looking at two of them. The first question was, and I'm afraid I'm paraphrasing here, why does the Bakerloo line always get the short end of the stick? The other one was, again paraphrasing, but do I think the Bakerloo line will be cut back to Stonebridge Park or Queen's Park, given how few trains go all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone? I think the two questions are not unconnected. Well, I mean, obviously they're both about the Bakerloo line, but apart from that. The London Underground's Bakerloo line seems kind of cursed. It has the oldest rolling stock in revenue service in the UK outside of heritage railways. The stations often feel quite old. The trains are overcrowded, and attempts to modernise and extend it seem to keep getting postponed. Trains feel slow and dilapidated, it gets very hot in summer, and all in all, it feels like the poor relation compared to other lines. This isn't a new thing either. When the Jubilee line opened in 1979, it poached the newer trains running on the Bakerloo line, leaving it with rolling stock built in the 1930s. Attempts to extend the line to the southeast have been in the works for getting on for 100 years at this point. It used to go to Stanmore and Watford Junction, but those services got cut back in 1979 and 1982 respectively. If we go back to the 1920s, the Bakerloo was still operating with the rolling stock it had had at its opening in 1906, which was considered extremely shabby. Although these days a train that's a little over 20 years old is a spring chicken by underground standards. So what did the Bakerloo line do to deserve all this? Well, what it all comes down to is a question of usage. Of the 11 tube lines, the Bakerloo comes in at the 9th least busy. Or at least it did in late 2023, which is when I got these figures from. The overall rankings do tend to shift around a bit. If you're curious as to the order, the Central line is the busiest, then the Northern, the Jubilee, the Piccadilly, the District, and the Victoria. The Hammersmith and City and the Circle are considered as one, they come next. And then we get the Bakerloo. Per the 2023 figures, it had 111.1 million passengers, compared to 260.9 million on the Central line. The only lines less busy are the Metropolitan and the Waterloo and City. As a result, the Bakerloo comes in at a very low priority. It doesn't serve an airport like the Piccadilly line. It doesn't run into the city like the Northern, Central or the subsurface lines. It does serve the West End, but so do a lot of other lines. Many of the suburbs it serves are also served by the Overground and the Main Line. For that matter, most of the stations it serves in central London are also served by other underground lines. The only ones it has to itself are Marylebone, Lambeth North and Regent's Park. Lambeth North is the least used station in Zone 1, and Marylebone is one of the smaller main line termini. Certainly the smallest served by the Underground. This has meant that it's had extra capacity, which in turn has made it a candidate to take services from other lines. The extension to Watford Junction came about because the London and North Western Railway originally built that line, but they had little interest in running commuter services, so they struck a deal with the Bakerloo. The LNWR got to run trains into central London without sullying themselves with mere commuter trains, and the Bakerloo got to fill some of their surplus timetable slots with passengers from the suburbs. The branch to Stanmore had originally been built by the Metropolitan Railway, but the Metropolitan's expansion had caused traffic jams on the lines into Baker Street, so once again the Bakerloo took on the extra work. And then it became overcrowded, which was one of the justifications for building the Jubilee line. There's this weird counterintuitive situation where the Bakerloo trains in central London during rush hour are extremely busy despite the line overall not being that busy compared to others. What's also counterintuitive is that those trains empty out a lot once they get out of central London. And that brings up the second question I was asked. Do I think the service all the way to Harrow and Wealdstone will be cut back? Is the relatively infrequent service to Harrow and Wealdstone a form of closure by stealth, i.e. the underground surreptitiously trying to force people onto alternative means of getting there in order to justify closing it down? Well, unless there's something being kept secret, I don't think it is. The reason so many trains terminate before Harrow and Wealdstone is that the further out you go from central London, the fewer passengers you have, and therefore the fewer trains you need. Stonebridge Park and Queen's Park both have sidings. What that means is you can terminate a train there, send it into the sidings to be prepared for turnaround, and bring another train from the sidings right away. Turnaround is a non-literal term here. I mean, you probably knew that. It should be noted that the service to Harrow and Wealdstone has been cut back before. In 1982, the entire Bakerloo service was cut back as far as Stonebridge Park. At the time, London Transport were desperate to cut costs. Naturally, many people who lived beyond Stonebridge Park complained. While demand was not enormous, it was high enough to cause a bit of a ruckus. However, it was determined that very few passengers using the Bakerloo line lived beyond Harrow and Wealdstone, so a compromise was reached. A peak-hour service as far as Harrow, with part of the costs to be covered by the Greater London Council. So while I don't think the service to Harrow and Wealdstone is going to improve anytime soon, I also don't think it's going to be removed. There was, and still is, demand for it. Last year, a number of newspapers trumpeted that the Bakerloo line was in danger of total collapse, not literally. There was even a threat from City Hall back in 2021 that an entire tube line, generally assumed to be the Bakerloo, could close due to a lack of funding in the wake of the pandemic. What can be done? Well, the factor that could change things for the better is the southeastern extension to Lewisham and onward to Hayes. As part of this programme, the Bakerloo would need new trains. It would also get new terminus facilities at the southern end. Elephant and Castle is basically the same terminus that existed in 1906, and that does place some limits on the number of trains that can be run. Of course, against that, you have the fact that it would push more people onto the trains through central London. And this may all be academic, given that nobody has any money to build anything anyway. There are many factors that go into making the Bakerloo line what it is. Lack of capacity, lack of investment, low priority status. But ultimately the problems with the Bakerloo mostly come down to money and age. So in that respect, it's very human. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this declining tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Now, while the Bakerloo is unpopular with many passengers, I also hear a lot of people saying that they're quite affectionate towards the Brown Wonder and its retro look. So let me know your opinions down below. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the Harrow to my Wealdstone. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.